But right now we're going to turn our attention to Thought Leader Perspectives panel. We have 4 great panelists from starting the end. Alex Redfern, EVS CTO. We have also Malcolm Harland, LiveU Country Manager for the UK. And we have, Vincent Noyer, Ross Video, Director of Sports Analysts, and Gareth Capon, Grabyo CEO. So Gareth, I will start with you first. We want to give a little bit of an overview from each of you as far as a project you've been working on in football that sort of shows how your company's technologies are being used in a new and innovative way, hopefully. So Gareth, take it away.
Thanks, Ken. Yes, I'm Gareth Capon, CEO of Grabyo. For those who don't know the business, Grabyo is a cloud production platform for video. We have 2 sides to the business, a short-form clips and highlights platform, which is used primarily for distributing content on all the social media platforms in real time, but also to digital apps and mobile apps. And then in the course of the last couple of years, we've been building out a live production platform in the cloud too, so taking many of the traditional components of a studio and rebuilding them natively in the cloud, all accessed via a browser. So we don't have any sort of legacy technology, and we sort of didn't really start from a production background, but I suppose looked at the industry and thought there was a lot of opportunity to think about if you reimagine production, you may well not start in a more traditional sense. If you could access everything in a browser, how would things be done differently? So when we look at, I suppose, the sports context, the football context, and we've actually been working in football for a long time. We work with Real Madrid and Barcelona and Chelsea and Rangers and Tottenham and many other clubs in Europe, as well as a number of the leagues, the Premier League and La Liga, for a number of years. And for a long time, all of that focus was around fan engagement, predominantly short-form distribution. How do you get content which might be on the pitch content, but also everything around the games in training and press conferences and all of the other content which originally wasn't necessarily distributed by the broadcasters and increasingly has been distributed by the clubs themselves or the league and even players to some extent. But when we look from a production perspective, I suppose we're seeing we're on a journey as a business now in terms of what we're building, and there's probably layers of where that is playing out at the moment, and will sort of change in the future from a Grabyo perspective. So the first and most obvious one is giving the tools to teams to start to create different types of content, predominantly digital live content, which wasn't available before. There are lots of examples of that. If you watch, I'm a Saints fan, so I should always talk about Southampton Football Club. They now do a show which goes on before the games for every home game, which is live on all of their social platforms. It involves comments from fans. They bring in social media content, so it's a completely different type of production. It's really lightweight to put together. It's conceived and delivered digitally, and it brings the fans closer to the audience. If you're a Saints fan, you can go and have an experience delivered by the club, and that's very different and quite common now in football, that we see that it's not just the leagues and the broadcasters, it's also the clubs as media companies. So that's one element. And then probably on the more traditional side of production, where Grabyo sits today, we're building all the functions of a complete production system, but we also recognize there's a lot of technology and hardware and other systems which are already in place. So maybe the focus for us at the moment is, well, how do you help extend that? How do we provide a different commentary version for a local audience in a different language? How do you talked about things like the Manning cast. How do you create these different types of production experiences that don't require any change in the traditional setup, but allow you to do something different for a different audience? We're doing a huge amount of stuff on TikTok live, for example, at the moment. I can give some examples later with partners like the UFC have done some really fascinating things on that platform. So for us, I think right now, the future may be a full 12-cam, multi-sport production in the cloud that doesn't require any hardware at all. But we recognise that that's the journey that will take place over the next year or two. But we're really committed to doing it, and obviously the biggest change, I suppose, is moving from being a social and a digital business to actually doing stuff on TV. We've had broadcasts on ESPN and other TV platforms in the last year, which is a pretty big change for us from where we started 4 or 5 years ago.
Excellent, great. So Vincent, obviously Ross Video has a wide product line, and your title is Director of Sport Analysis. I have to ask you first, what exactly is your job remit? What do you do in Director of Sport Analysis? What tool and what Ross tools do you kind of have under your purview?
Hi, thanks, Ken. So actually, we joined Ross 3 years ago, so you may know Pierrot Sports Graphics from the early days. And I'm still the director for the Pierrot Sports Graphics product, which covers club and broadcasters. We have expanded in the US thanks to the Ross guys. But the main thing now for us is that we have a ton of cool products working around us. So we are no longer siloed and on our own. We can just play and integrate with the replay server, with the expression rendering, with the AR I'll touch upon in a minute. So my remit is really graphics for sports, and I work alongside all the Sport Live event teams and all the great people. There's just so many products now around us. Like, it's like a playground. We used to be a little bit like, oh, let's just focus on the tactical analysis. But now we're like, oh, we can think bigger. This is cool. So that's where we are. And it's a World Cup year, which I'm sure you've noticed. And so there's a lot of things we're trying to push out there on time for the World Cup. But a bit more on this later.
And next year's a World Cup year as well, because the Women's World Cup is in Australia and New Zealand in, I think, August, September, I believe. So Malcolm, LiveU perspective, obviously we're going to talk 5G a little bit later today, but I've seen, I was at the Super Bowl, which is another form of football, and your systems played a key role for people to be able, some of the broadcasters, to be able to really nimbly move and respond and go to off-site locations without having to rent, production trucks and transmission vehicles. So give us kind of an update on something you guys have been working with on the football side.
Yeah, Ken, thank you. I think from our side, for those who don't know LiveU, we started in the news area 15 years ago, and we are responsible for bringing many news stories for broadcasters and media outlets across the world. And we've evolved into the sports market over the last 4 or 5 years. As Gareth said, we work with a number of the Premier League football clubs. We work across different sports, and our aim here is to make sure that the content that we can present to the production platforms is of the highest quality, it's highly robust, it's delivered in low latency, and it's delivered really cost effectively and really efficiently. And I think what we've seen, maybe some highlights from the last 12 months is the breadth and depth of what we're doing in football. So, for example, we're running what we're calling a light VAR project in the third tier of Brazilian football, where there are 4 cameras. They're delivered to pitch side on an iPad, and the fourth official, the VAR officials can use that in real time. They can switch between the cameras with our partner. We work with a partner called PlaySite in this particular case. They enable that scrolling backwards and forwards to be able to do VAR. And we see that breaking out, so that if there are 4 cameras at a football stadium, why not use that for other content as well? It could be for player development, it could be for player welfare, it could be for broadcasting out. And what we're also now seeing is, and we'll talk a little bit more about rights and how do you exercise those rights and make sure you get value from those rights, we are beginning to move through the tiers of sport. So if I give the example of Austrian football, we work in the Austrian second tier of football, and we now enable 240 matches a year to be broadcast live. They go with Sport Radar onto their OTT platform. They go out on the main Austrian broadcaster, ORF's platform, and we've been able to enable that because we are very cost effective. We have that nimble approach. We don't have to be fixed into a particular location. And we see that developing all the time. So we've literally just taken a deal to start to provide the content for second-tier football in one of the African countries using our LU800 unit. 4 cameras in, it's a very simple solution. It uses a cellular networks. It can use connections at the ground for fixed connectivity. So the drive for us is all about enablement. People have sports rights. They have football rights. What do you want to do with those football rights? You want to make them available, you want to monetize them, you want to deliver them live rather than packaged. And we're developing not just the products, but the workflows to enable that and Gareth mentioned it, you mentioned it also, Laurent, putting the tools that you would have had in a traditional OB in a much more remote location. It could be remote on premise, it could be cloud, and we'll probably touch on that as well a little bit later.
Sure. So Alex, from the EVS perspective, and congrats on the new role. That was, a month ago, roughly?
Yeah, a couple of months ago. Thank you.
Congrats, excellent. The last time we saw each other was at the Super Bowl in Miami in February 2020.
2020, yeah.
When you were working on the corner of the room with the little next generation project on the making every camera a high-speed camera.
That's right, yeah.
So what's that project been like for the last 2 years, and also sort of what other projects have you guys been working on with football?
So that was what I touched on earlier. I think Extra Motion was, I think that was the very first iteration of Extra Motion on-prem at that point, and we looked and said, the best way to enable this for broadcasters is to put it in the cloud, is to make it, spin up, spin down, basically make it our first real SaaS offering. And the last couple of years have basically seen that productized and brought to the forefront. It's heavily used in the US by a number of broadcasters. We're seeing more and more of an uptake here. The reason for using it at the Super Bowl is all the mini cams everywhere. There's miniature cameras that you would never be able to have a super slow-mo in that position. But suddenly you've got a 3x camera looking down the line or in the back of the goal net. And that was a real driver for us, and people started to see the business value of having super motion anywhere. And it means that when we start to look at also, perhaps lower tier or smaller productions where there would never be budget for a super slow motion, suddenly budget becomes available. It's an OpEx as opposed to a CapEx. I don't need to invest in expensive cameras with big lenses. So that was really key for us. And then centralizing it, hosting it on the cloud, making it available to everyone, obviously that's a sort of a no-brainer. The other thing when we talk about we touched on decentralized production has been a big driver over the last 2 years, whether it's remote production, whether it includes cloud, but gluing those things together. So I touched on earlier allowing operators to work remotely. That's something that the new remote really enables, and it's something that we've had to work on. Actually, even with the old remotes, I sort of said about this US broadcaster, they've been doing it for years, using really old-fashioned, really basic, keep it simple technologies. But we wanted to take the approach of, okay, the new stuff needs to be built for that. It needs to be ready for that. So it's been a total approach in the live production area. We've also considered the network that connects our servers together has to be ready to be extended, ready to be decentralized, and have two venues connected to each other, or a broadcast center connected to a truck in a very easy and efficient way. And that's what we're starting to see now. We're starting to see these broadcasters and users wanting to use that model. They were forced to keep people at home during COVID. Now they're starting to say, well, why not keep people at home? More likely a production hub as opposed to a keeping people at home. That's what we've started to see. But in the live domain, that's been really important. And then something specific to sports and very football-driven is more of the asset management layer over the top, the content delivery with our Media Hub platform, again, cloud-hosted. Take the content that gets generated on-prem, get it to the cloud, and deliver it, basically. How can we deliver that to the rights holders? How can the rights owners distribute their content in an interesting way?
So obviously, we could talk about EVIS's role in the top world-class events that we are all familiar with, all across, the really high end. But one of the themes here has been sort of that second tier and third level. And I've spoken with you guys, for years about sort of that challenge and sort of getting down. And so, what do you see as the opportunity there with these cloud-based tools to sort of drive into the next level down of events for EVS?
I think there's a couple of approaches to it. We have the products that are aimed at the lower tiers. The other thing that we've seen a real interest is the utilization of equipment. When we decentralize things, when things aren't in trucks having to move around from place to place, and we start to decentralize things and have servers that you can get a high utilization of them. So actually, even though they're higher value items and would be seen as only valuable for the top tier, if I can get more and more usage out of it, if I can use it for 80% of the week, 90% of the week, then it becomes valuable. So, as well as having the X1 layer, X1 is our sort of tier 2 replay all-in-one production system. As well as having that, the utilization of the higher end stuff is really interesting, because then you get the higher end production values in the lower tiers as well.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, because I think what you're seeing is obviously a content explosion. Right, and people you mentioned it up here with trying to make use of all this content in as many ways as possible. Gareth, from your perspective, do you see any sort of, what are some of the big themes you're seeing in the industry? Because I was talking with Will from our team the other day. He and I were discussing having debates on stage about technologies, and we're like, there's not a lot of debates anymore. Everybody seems to be sort of on the same page. There's some, but even NDI and 2110, you get them on stage, they'll be like, well, there's some good uses for this and good uses for that. So, Gareth, when you look at the industry right now, what's sort of on your hit list as far as top trends that are impacting your business and your customers?
I think from a content perspective, there's definitely be a trend to telling more stories. I mean, it seems an obvious thing to say, but whether it's behind the scenes or in football about the athletes, about the players, the inside workings of the club. Obviously, that's happening at the documentary level, the Netflix, Amazon level, but it's also right down to individual leagues and clubs, and we're seeing an enormous amount of that, I think, and much more of that being done live, which wasn't necessarily the case in the past. That was definitely one of the things that was, it started in the pandemic. The Q&As with players at home training in their, with their Peloton in their bedroom. But so we're seeing a lot more of that. So people say, how do we tell authentic stories live and tell the inside story of a club or a league? So that's been a big theme. I think this idea of making content relevant for different audiences is probably the biggest one, though. We talked about things like language and commentary and graphics, and how do you. This idea of, in the past, we had a world feed and it went to everyone, and if you're lucky, a broadcaster would do a great job and personalize it, but it would essentially be the same. I think what's OTT obviously unlocked capacity in terms of distribution. There is no constraint in distribution anymore, which means you now need to think about, well, what does the audience actually want, and do I segment my content for a different audience? So for us, I think that is probably the biggest area. People are coming saying, we want to do more because we know that the experience that we want to provide, both live and somewhat on demand as well, there is a different demand, there's a different need. And sort of the last piece that sort of underpins all of that is, and I think everyone's been talking about it here, is the increase in production quality. Over time, there is this drift towards quality, and you see it everywhere, even on social platforms. Everyone would think about YouTube and say, hey, YouTube was just cats on surfboards. But you look at the best creators on YouTube now, they are highly produced professional content creators. They're investing a lot of money in creating really high quality content, and they've got a big global audience, and that is certainly the trend that we're seeing, that there is this increasing need for more professional tools, better quality, because in the end, consumers do tend to drift towards quality when they have the option to, but if there's nothing else available, then they'll watch something that's there, and I think trying to get those two bits right is important to us.
Right. So when you talk to somebody and they say, we want to bring on your technology and help create more content, do you sometimes find that maybe their teams are their teams big enough to create more content? Because this seems another thing. There are so many, you could hire so many people to tell more stories and more angles. Every player on the pitch has their own story after every match. So what's your sense as far as this challenge of kind of weighing staffing, content creation tools, and output?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of things there. I mean, obviously, fundamentally, we're a cloud platform, so you can hire people from anywhere to do the work, although there's still some, quality considerations to make. I think that the fact that, Grabyo is a fully managed service, not in terms of people, but in terms of technology. You can spin up a production environment in 15 minutes and get started with something that's of high quality, and that's quite different, actually, to many of the other options for cloud out there. If you don't have a DevOps team, or you don't understand how to spin up an environment in EC2 and manage that infrastructure and deploy some containers to run your applications, not everyone has those skills. We abstract all of that. It's an auto-scaling environment available globally that you can just use. So that does allow people to test things. And I think there is a consideration around resources, but we have people who run shows in Grabyo that are one-person teams, and we've done productions which have had 40 people in 4 different continents work on the system. So it is really flexible. Look, we're a long way from being finished. There's a lot of stuff to build. That's quite clear. But I think the idea that you're constrained by people is quite different now. And fundamentally, you can test. You can buy the services by the hour, and you can test things. And I think that's quite empowering for the teams. Excellent,
great, yeah. So wait, real quick, are you paying attention to the metaverse? Because I know most people here are probably confused by the metaverse. Are you thinking about it? What's your take on the metaverse? I'm going to put you on the spot.
At a personal level or professional level, I think that we've done a few things already. We've had our technology used for streaming into sort of VR environments and Oculus environments for Facebook and specifically. So that's already happening. I think that look, it's a big topic. We could spend a lot of time talking about Web3 and the metaverse. I own issue NFTs, so you've got to put your money where your mouth is. But look, I think there's a lot that's going to happen in that space. But I think sometimes we get too focused on almost like the end consumer experience. Actually, a lot of what's happening around Web3 and the metaverse is about rights, it's about structure, it's about distribution technology. So right now, when we think about the platform, you have to go back to where are the customers, and certainly from a pure VR metaverse perspective, the distributed audience is still very small. Mobile is 100 times larger, probably more than that. So for us, really, it's about how do we create content environments for every screen. The metaverse for us will be another experience and another set of screens ultimately, and I think that is probably our strategy. Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of pans out, and maybe we'll have a master class on that later, and you can lead it, because many people need some help on that. So Vincent, from your perspective, I guess let's go to the analysis, because I think that's another technology that has,
over time advanced. I mean, there was a time when I would speak to people who were doing analysis, it would take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to render the clip. So by the time that clip was rendered, there was already another good play to try to re-render. So where are we at as far as just sort of that landscape, as far as how quick the turnaround is, and how will that also filter down to lower level?
Oh, wow, yeah. We're way past this this point now. We're doing everything within a minute, sometimes 20 seconds, sometimes actually real-time live on air, depending on the story you want to put out there. But I think now the new battle is going to be how do you work with AR or XR? I'm really big fond of what's coming up with extended reality. I think it's going to be really helpful in many productions. But we've seen over the last 2 years people being forced to play with touchscreens and stuff like that because of the pandemic and distancing. And actually, to some people's surprise, they liked it and they want to continue using more touchscreen and integrate it better. So where we're going now is, and that's a trend I'm seeing, is like actually thinking about how to use the touchscreen and when, and also combining all the renderers so you don't have just the tactical renderer here, the AR one, the VR one, but actually trying to get everything to talk to every renderer to talk to each other nicely in a well-integrated way. And thinking about what you're putting out there, especially in AR, it tends to be a lot of pre-made content that you just press a button and it just plays. So what we want to change is, well, actually you can interact with it live. So it's no longer you have to prepare everything before halftime. You just want to know, okay, we agree we're going to talk about that. That's a great point, great defense here. All right, we'll roll the clip. If you want the data, we have data visualization. If you actually make a point, then you can grab an iPad or a touchscreen, and it should be available to the production guys on the Hero renderer, on the AR Voyager. For us, it's Voyager, but it could be anything. And that's where we're going. It should no longer be siloed. It should no longer be, you have to think in advance. It has to support the story super fast. So that's a key trend we're seeing. But one of the things that we realized with this pandemic as well is something we call hyper-convergence, which is being efficient. A lot of people had to work with less engineer on the ground, with less operator, but still want to do the high quality you were talking about. And how do you achieve that? You can no longer have 4 guys sat side by side in a truck. And so a lot of product designers like me have been forced to think, okay, your box is used at 60, 80% for that. What else can it do? Do we need like 3 bays of hardware to do that production? Could we shrink it into 1 bay? Think outside the box, of your product, how can we make the whole production more efficient? How can we make it easier to deploy? How can we get only like 1 or 2 engineers the day before on the ground instead of 5? These are key trends we're seeing globally on all aspects of the ROS portfolio, not just in graphics. But it's a true demand now. It's like, okay, guys, we don't want to have like 12 views just to do graphics. Can we just get the renderer to be more efficient? Can we do more, essentially? And that's a super nice thing to work on as a product designer, I think.
Yeah, I was talking with Satiris Salamoris from OBS the other day, and he was talking about their OB van project that they had at the curling. So it was basically, and his challenge was, they could bring in trucks, 5 or 6 trucks, but when those trucks come in, they all have to still spend another day or 2 personalizing them for each of the sports, even though they can all have the same gear. So his vision is, they got it down to 9 racks of equipment to sort of just have, you have the control panels that are dumb products, and then you have them connected to these, and he can more easily replicate what he needs, and then from a technical standpoint, but also customize it much more quickly than having to sort of rewire things and tweak things.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Malcolm, obviously, what are some of the top trends you're seeing in the industry? Like we said, 5G is clearly one. Sotiris again mentioned they used a couple of cameras on the Alpine runs that were in the live feed. We're actually using 5G. So obviously 5G is one. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but what's sort of on your agenda?
So I think 5G's key for us as the way our technology is developing. We actually started LiveU products back in the 3G days. There was this grand evolution to the fantastic 4G LTE technologies. And we see 5G as an evolution, but it's also going to be an enabler. And I'm old enough to go all the way back to when 10 gigabit per second lasers were developed for the telecoms networks. And I sat in a room and somebody said, who's going to use that? And the answer was, well, it's for all of those things that you've never thought about. And that's the industry we're in right now. People are trying to think, to be innovative, to drive direction. And we see 5G in many different facets. So we see 5G for its bandwidth, that's for sure. It has big advantages on bandwidth, but it also has great advantages on latency. It has great advantages on having many different frequencies, so there's less congestion, which for us, delivering product content live over bonded cellular networks is really important to us. But it's not also just about delivering content from a football stadium out to a broadcast center or into the cloud. It's also about being able to provide those production tools going back to that venue. Video return, audio return, remote camera control. Going back to what Vincent says about how are you going to remove the number of people from the stadium, reduce the carbon footprint, reduce the travel, improve the welfare of the people that are involved, improve the efficiencies of all of those people who are involved in a production by actually placing them in the place where all of their tools are, where they can become more efficient, where they can do their full shift of work and maybe cover events in the morning from Asia Pacific, events in the middle of the day from Europe, and events at the end of the day from the Americas. And part of our challenge, and it's not there yet, is trying to make sure that for all of the content that we enable to be delivered out over 5G and moving to 4 cameras over 8 cellular networks, or it's 4K over 8 cellular networks, that's at the highest possible quality. It's got really high resilience. We're stepping up what's being delivered, but actually then producing the tools so the guys and girls who are operating, they're doing the production, they're doing the direction, they're doing the remote commentary, they can do that in real time because that's what they're used to doing when they're running an OB event with 50 people on site with 4 OB trucks and a transmission vehicle, and that's the evolution. So 5G, it's going to be an enabler, and it's going to evolve what we do to do more and do it more effectively, and back to the position of efficiently and cost effectively for rights. So everyone wants their own rights to go out live. That's, packaged is fine, but if you can put it out live, let's do it. And I think 5G will become a big enabler to that, together with the technologies that all of us here are really talking about.
Excellent, great. Well, we have about 4 minutes left, so we're going to do a little bit of round robin. Now, the NAB show is coming up. Now, I know that maybe because there hasn't been trade shows in the last 2 years, the typical, that's when you're going to roll out new products thing is in the past. We'll find out as far as the press releases that come across my desk in the next few weeks. But wanted to give a little bit of preview for each of you as far as the show, if you're going to be there. And if not, something else you'd like to discuss as far as a new product or innovation. So, Alex, you're up first.
Yeah, we'll be at NAB this year. I think it's a slightly different approach, slightly smaller booth, different location, new for us. But main thing for us is talking about solutions. It will be our first full trade show, I think, with our media infrastructure range. So talking about routing, control, glue infrastructure, media infrastructure. Showing how that integrates into the product range, the new Strada solution, which is a sort of an IP-SDI hybrid routing solution, will be very important to us there. It will be literally gluing our booth together. So that'll be a big one for us at NAB this year. That'll be one of the big drivers for us.
Cool, excellent. Malcolm?
Yeah, similar story to Alex. We have a presence at NAB. We're hoping it's a busy show. And it starts to bring that trade show back alive again. We have some new product announcements, including 5G, as you would imagine, but equally we're also looking more towards some of our orchestration layers, our abilities to do content delivery, but this is primary distribution, secondary contribution, to make sure it hits the right platforms and can then be produced and delivered onwards. And looking at making sure that we are also being able to integrate with those workflows as it sit further through the flow to get that content out to fans, down to broadcasters. So hopefully those folks who can come along will see some of that in real time when we're all there.
Sounds good. Now, Vincent, I'm putting you on the spot. Are you going to be there? Or?
Yeah, so Ross Video will be at NAB.
Right.
As Alex said, slightly different format this year. Reduced presence, but still there. We have stopped aligning product release with NAB IBC in the last 2 years, which is good for me as a product director, because then I can focus on the World Cup and actually giving my clients updates when it's needed and not just for a show. So the aim is really to bolster the integration with the AR platform. So we are ready this summer. We're already ready, but we want to be very ready by the summer, so you guys have time to prepare for the World Cup later on.
Awesome. Yeah, software users do not want to have to wait for a trade show to get their updates. And Gareth, how about from a Grabyo perspective?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Vincent, we don't sort of time our product releases around trade shows, and we ship updates every 2 weeks normally. So we try to get, there's this constant stream of things happening on the platform. I think the focus at NAB will really be around us. We're starting to do more broadcast delivery, so looking at the outputs from social media right through to TV quality output, and then some updates around the sort of the flexibility of the user experience. We've got a whole load of user experience updates on the production side that we're gonna be talking about.
All right, great, excellent. Well, thanks to our panelists for their time today. Really appreciate it. And you are dismissed.